Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode, we talk about how do you end an argument. My takeaway today was that there is actually growth in the argument process, but it isn't in the argument itself. It's actually in the debrief where you talk to your wife about how to be better in communicating within the argument.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that Paul mentioned is anybody can do this. We're always trying to be better, get better, but it takes practice. And Paul mentions much like a musician hones their skill, it's it's built in the time that they put in to hone that skill. I'm excited to have this conversation because this is something my soul needs right now.
Well,
The topic of today, well, first and foremost, welcome everybody to our current listeners and new listeners alike. Thank you for tuning in and, being a part of what today will be some self healing, some hopefully new realizations and new abilities. We're today going to talk about how do you end an argument? And that's, more or less asking how each of us does end an argument, tips and tricks on getting out of your own head in order to end the argument, and hopefully for me some new skills in this area because Lord knows I need them.
I mean, it's basically a superpower.
Might as well.
Yeah.
So you're
No,
saying,
well, I actually I feel like it's you know how it's like you have to spend like 1,000 hours to be an expert at something.
mm,
I feel like it's one of those things where like anyone can do it. Like basically anyone can become a really good musician if they put the hours in. This is one thing, is one reason why I love music, because literally anyone can become good at it if they put the hours in. Like there's no like, with sports of some sort, you have to have like some type of hand-eye coordination or like some physical gifting, and then put the hours in to become at that elite level that we see on the professional, the upper echelon professional. Because you can still play, minor leagues, or play high school, college, whatever. To get into that next level, you have to keep growing. But with this topic, it's more time, space, figuring out where you are, and figuring out how to communicate with your wife.
mhm.
And as you grow, sometimes you run into the um and we'll talk about it a little bit later, like you'll see where you used to be come up, but in like the other person, in your spouse, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what's supposed to happen. So
Right.
yeah, there's a lot to come with arguments and conflict, for sure.
Yeah. So what I just heard you say is we all have weaknesses.
And yeah, in a nutshell, for sure.
But yeah, so I mean, current situation for me is like I feel like I am like admittedly mistakenly choosing to die on the hill. And it's like I'm trying to make a point. I know my point has been made, but much like my wife has had to deal with for a long time, which is, to your point, I don't feel like I'm getting the recognitions for these newly developed skills of realizing and being able to communicate my feelings. And so I'm stuck.
Yeah, man, so many things to say there. um the one thing, and we've talked about this before, but the one thing about growth is we see our growth maybe sooner than other people see it, if their opportunity for the growth hasn't arisen, right? So if you haven't had if you've grown in your take on how to communicate, especially in conflict, but you don't particularly have a lot of conflicts, when these things come up and there's an argument, the other spouse may not know that you've grown because you've grown more so in mindset than been able to show your action.
Mm,
And in them being human, they may just at this time be like, this is how I feel and this is it. And it may be what you had been working against for yourself. And now they're like, nope, this one, I'm here. And then you're able to identify because we've been working on ourselves. And so now we can see patterns and habits and all that, which you may not have seen before. But now after putting in the work, you're like, oh, this is what's happening. This was happening. And you're like, wait, how do I feel about knowing that this is happening? And I
ah,
don't know if I like it. And I don't like it when I'm on the other side. But
yeah,
you haven't been there ever. Or not often. So it's
right.
like, wait, so there's just a lot to process in that space.
Yeah. And the funny thing for me is all my life, I've always been like a worst scenario imaginer.
Hmm.
So whatever's going on, I'm like, all right, well, this is the worst scenario. And this is where I want to live for a moment, knowing that that's probably not the case. And I think more times than not, it works out for me because if I live in that space for a moment, anything that happens positive above that space, I'm like, oh, well, that's an acceptable result, right? Because like the worst didn't happen. So I could live with this or I could move past this. And like in the moment, I'm just kind of like, I guess I'm thinking to myself, is she trying to make me feel the pain right now? And to some extent, I'm like, well, maybe I deserve it.
Hmm.
Even though like my feelings are very valid, right? I understand that I've come to this conclusion, but then on the back end, I'm like still like half feeling sorry for things that I've done in the past and that we've moved on from. And then so like there's just this weird mixture that is muddying the water right now.
Yeah, and the hard thing about this is when you're in the space of a current argument or like a fresh one just happened,
Mhm.
and you haven't got to kind of you haven't got to address and debrief like where the waters are coming off, where you can say, hey babe, like, we just went through this and we have this, like, can we talk about, kind of what I was feeling in that moment, and how you were feeling, let's kind of work that out. Because pro tip, how to end the argument: once it all dies down, have a conversation about it so you don't repeat it, right? um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of hard when you're in it to go back, so then you can see if, yes, maybe your spouse was trying to make you feel it because in the past you had a wall up and you weren't feeling what she wanted you to feel. But now that you're feeling it, she's still had years of trying to get you to feel. So she doesn't understand that you actually understand her feelings yet.
Right. Sense.
Especially if you've always been like, which is my issue, is like, yeah, I get it. I feel it. Like, you make sense. Like that type of thing where it can seem dismissive. But now when you really understand it, if you use that same language, she's like, oh, you're trying to dismiss me again. No, we're going back right back in it. Like, you need to feel what I've done. But you can't know that's what she was trying to do until you talk to her about it. And then in that conversation, in that debrief, you can let her know that, you've been working on it. I really did understand what you're feeling. This is how I'm feeling. Like, once I say it now, I mean, it may take some time, but once I say this now, like, I really do get it. I'm not trying to use words just to end the conversation, all that type of stuff. Um, so I think that's one of those things we can only think we know what the other person is thinking.
Mhm.
Um, and having to juggle that with trying to figure out where they are, plus figure out where we are, is just a whole lot of mess going on.
Yeah. And so a couple things there. I've played a lot of poker in my lifetime, and I feel that I've gotten pretty good at reading other people, right? And I tend to use this skill in arguments with my wife, right? Like I
Hmm.
can read body language, I can read the signs, and I understand when something's building up. I understand, just much like she understands me because we've just been together for so long,
Right.
you know. And so many times I will again pre-frame how the conversation is going to go, right? And so like I'm all geared up for what's about to happen, and a lot of times I'll be wrong, but a lot of times I'll also be right. And I think that's part of my problem because when like going back to the statement I made earlier of getting past that firewall I have, now that I'm reflecting on it, it seems to me that when I have this assumption and it plays out the way I thought it was going to,
Hmm.
it validates my firewall.
That
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And then I'm like, well, now like I have to die on the hill.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can die on, I'm not telling anyone what hill to decide to die on. All I'm saying is, are the casualties that come around with you sacrificing and dying on the hill, are they worth it? When you look around, is the, using this analogy, is the body count worth you on that hill? Right. So you have to figure out, when in the argument is it worth it to concede and just move on to continue being happily married? And when is it, no, my spouse needs to know what I'm feeling right now, and they're gonna sit there while I'm sitting here, and we're both gonna stew over it. It's like, is that worth it, or can we move on?
Yeah. And I think in the moment I wasn't ready to do that.
Hmm.
Because we even got to a point where she was like, well, I think, we just need to agree to disagree. And I was like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, and that is a place where you just have to figure that out. Like, sometimes it is beneficial for the relationship to stay there so that your spouse understands where you're coming from,
Mhm.
but it's kind of figuring out when those times are.
Right.
Is, obviously, if it's a thing like, if there's some type of like substance abuse, and like you have to stand your ground and say, look, like, we can't go on like this, I need you to see it. Sometimes that, but if it's, you know you didn't move my car right to the spot where I like it, is that worth it? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So obviously those are two polar opposite examples, so there's many things in the middle, but it's really, what do you feel is best in your relationship? And like I said, after you kind of understand, you get to see where that hill is once you've had conversations after your conflict, to figure out what was the real reason and kind of how you felt and how you can communicate through that. Which is why I said it's like a master's level thing of ending an argument, because you have these conversations and putting this time on understanding, when we do argue, if you don't, your arguments will become less, and then when you do argue, it will actually bring a attention to the spouse, like, oh, we're arguing right now. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, why? So this is important to my spouse, because why? Let's figure out why this is important, not much less do we agree or do we not agree. So, but it's you have to get to that space from whatever your normal argument level is, mitigating that to having more constructive conversations. And so when those arguments do come, you like, okay, red flag, everything stops. Let's figure out what's the bottom line, what's underneath this. But that all comes with time. I mean, no one really ever gets a master's class in it. You just get better.
Oh man. So this is just silly, but do you suggest that I actually carry a red flag and just toss that up there?
Listen,
Like,
listen.
full stop.
I mean, maybe just have like a red screen app on your phone and just pull it out, like, we're here, and that will lighten and shift the mood. I'm not
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
I mean, that is silly, but you can use it as a tool.
Right, right. 'Cause I will get to making one of those.
I'm just saying, just where did you even pull that from? Like,
I got 5 of them. Don't worry about it.
right, don't worry. Here's all. Don't do the sandbag like the refs, because then you might throw it and hit someone in the eye, and I mean,
I mean, I was definitely back, but either way. So I think we kind of touched on it, but there's an aspect here where I feel like I'm being forcibly put in her shoes in order to feel how she's felt. Right. And so it's difficult for me to kind of have to play both sides of the coin. We spoke on that a little bit. So with that, we also spoke on, being right and knowing when to move on. And I know there's a saying that you like to use for this. Trying to formulate my question within this, right? I know that we need to move forward. I also know that we both have points within this argument which make each of us right.
mm-hmm.
So I want you to, put your quote out there. But what I'm also considering is, do I need to sometimes set my feelings aside in order to be able to move on?
Anyone who's needed to end an argument knows that sometimes that's the case, right? Like
Mhm.
if your spouse is not going to budge where they are, or you just have seen and come to in yourself, like, this, we've been doing this too long. Let's move on and figure out some way to agree to disagree, as sometimes we hear that. But yeah, my wife and I have a saying is, are you dead right? And it basically means you can be right, but in your rightness, are you killing everything that's around you? Is everything else suffering because you want to be right and you want to prove you're right? And you could very well be validated in your feelings, right in the situation and all that. But if that is hurting your marriage, to be right and to make sure that your spouse knows you're right, you have to decide, is that worth it? So
Mhm.
to your question is, do you have to, swallow your feelings or give more grace than you want to give in that situation? Yes, because again, what does it all come back to? Winning in our marriage. That's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do. That's the tools we're trying to give. That's why we're giving our experience. And sometimes to win, you have to lose. I know that sounds terrible in that analogy, but really you're not losing if your marriage is prospering. And if it takes you in that moment backing up and just giving up on your feelings and your need to feel right so that you can get to the point of the debrief, because the debrief is where the growth happens. You don't grow from an argument. You grow from how you react to the argument, right?
Okay.
So arguments are well and good, conflict is well and good. We all know that struggle in life and sports, in you know different things. When conflict comes, you generally get better, or you get stronger together, right? When you go through conflict as a team, like, there's something about that, walking through that together brings you together, um brings you closer. So at each argument or each conflict that you have, you and your wife, if you do this debrief process, you will grow as a unit. So for me, it's like, let's get to that part. you know
Yeah, yeah.
and sometimes I do have a hill that I want to die on, so I'm not acting like I'm the perfect person. um and sometimes I'm in my head about it, and I want my wife to feel what I'm feeling. But it's new to me to be able to express my feelings, so that's a thing. um But yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And again, it's very new to me as well to be able to express my feelings in the way that I have, um, which brings up another point. It's new to us to be able to express our feelings. And we feel, well, I'll speak for myself. I feel that I have done that well, but there's potential there that I'm seeing that I may need more practice in expressing my feelings, right? Because I'm thinking about it this way in the, I'll call it the heat of battle, right? I'll feel like I've expressed what I'm feeling. But if I did that in the wrong way that triggered my wife, then I'm making it harder for her to hear me, right?
Hmm.
So maybe I need to go back and even though I've made my points, maybe I've only done it once, maybe I need to go back and kind of, activate the redo, the reset button on the Nintendo.
Yeah.
Right? Player two.
Yeah.
And that's more or less just to confirm that she's heard me. Maybe I need to say it in a different way, like I'm saying, and ask for feedback as I've made my point, right? Are you understanding what I'm saying to you and how this is making me feel? And I think that's probably not what I've done.
Right. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Like, no, don't say that. Don't say that.
And it wasn't that she touched my radio. So,
Yeah. Hilarious. But no, that makes perfect sense. And again, it's so funny. We come across this newfound enlightenment and we want everything to be, rainbows and butterflies. But at the same time, our wives had to endure us for so long, not being this person. Like they're going to have defaults when it comes to their conflict resolution that they've had to put in place when they're coming to us. So
Mhm.
it's like, it's that place of knowing that you've grown, but also having to reiterate that this is real growth, right? This isn't just a one-time thing. This isn't just, you know, a quick fix. No, this is who I am forever. But we have to continually prove that for for the years that we have not been that. Let's do this a couple times to show that we are that. Because honestly, they've been waiting for us to be this, but they may not know how to receive that because we don't know how to really give it
Oof.
out and show. So that's where I am on that growth.
Yeah. Ouch.
So
Oh,
I mean, let's think about this, right? You like to cook, use a
yeah.
cooking analogy, right? So if you've made the dish a same way for 13 years,
Mhm.
right? And that's your staple way of creating that dish, whether it's good or bad, everyone that's eaten it expects that taste, right? So you go ahead and change it, like this is the new way I'm going to do it, even if it's like it's not worse, it's just different, right? Even if it's better, it's still going to be different than expected.
Yeah.
So when they come and receive that dish, they're going to have to train their mind to experience it a different way. But they won't know like until you've made it a couple more times. Like you've made these mashed potatoes with Thanksgiving this same year, and now you're adding a little bit more garlic and a little bit more onion, so it's got a little bit. It's better, but it's different. So they're every time they go to bite it, they're going to have that taste of what it should be, quote unquote, because it's
Mhm.
been that time. But oh, this is better. Oh yeah, next time. Oh yeah, he did say he was going to make this. This is better, and then it's going to take. And then after the fourth or fifth time, okay, this is the way he makes his mashed potatoes now, right? But
Yeah.
does that make a little bit? I mean, is that a good?
I mean, that hits because I'm forever tinkering with recipes, right? So that I mean, yeah, that hits all of those points for me. I man. That's Okay, I'm in there. I got it. So as we're wrapping up, there's a major point that we need to speak on, and
Okay.
that's when it's been too long, right? When the argument has gone far too long, how do we get out of it? What are the next steps?
I would say, to your point of just give like a summary, kind of like you said, go back and make sure, because this is the point where we are both on our own hills and kind of sitting there, right? So the best way to get it is reiterate your points, reiterate your feelings in the kindest way you can in that moment. No one's perfect. um, and then let her know that you hear her and what she has to say, and everyone's valid, basically. Like, I get what you're saying. I understand, and whatever it is, I'm going to work on this, and let's move on, kind of thing. Whatever is the best way to not trigger your wife on those things, because you
Yeah.
want to make sure that she does understand that you understand where she's coming from.
Mhm.
And you can all say, hey, let's follow up in a couple days and just talk about where we were in this space. um, and I think putting a date and time on when you're going to come back to it and following through with that lets her know that you are committed to being better and really understanding her, and also have a space to express your feelings, um, in how you got to that space.
I like that. So are we talking about basically putting a date and time on when to debrief?
Yes.
Okay. And like you
Yeah.
said earlier, in the debrief is where the growth happens, is where you get to have a calm conversation about all the happenings and how we can handle those things going forward if they were to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, for those that need to make lists about, her points and whatever, and your points and yours, it's not about rehashing and having the argument all over again. It's more so, if you can remember how you felt when this was said or this was not received, and why. Kind of like, I know your points and I understand what you're saying, but I I wanted to make sure that you didn't feel like I was invalidating your feelings when I said, I got you, right? Or what were
Mhm.
you saying? Did you really feel that way? Or how could I have said that better? Right? It's really coming with, if you come in humility and saying, how could I be better in that conflict space? That will kind of break down her walls of whatever she's coming with on the debrief. You're like, I want to get better. Like, I don't want to argue. I don't want to raise my voice. I want to fully understand what you're trying to say, and I want you to understand me. How can I do that better? And then have like one or two points where you were thinking that you had to think how she was thinking, if that makes sense. If you're trying to think, how is she in that moment? And also, how can you always use, I would say that I don't usually say always, but always use, how could I do this differently? Or how could I make you receive what I'm saying better? If you ask that, she'll let you know how she wants to be spoken to.
Mhm.
And then that's a great way to start that conversation.
Okay. I like that. So the debrief space is a delicate space because there's always the potential of going back into the argument if you're not handling it properly.
Yes.
So, be what I'm hearing you say is be aware of how you're speaking in that space because this is more the solution space,
Hmm.
especially for the future, not the rehash space. So that's
Yeah,
good.
it's not about having the argument again. It's
Mm.
how can we communicate in that space. It's more so, how do we become better communicators?
Yep.
And I'm a praying person, so I'm in prayer for that space, the couple days leading up to, and um, if you're open to it, like praying before it even starts,
Yeah.
because that also just has a calming effect. And it's really praying for your marriage, right?
Yeah.
And that's an important place. And I believe, as husbands, that's what we need to do. So that always helps, at least for me. I can speak for me and what happens. So in that space.
That's amazing. All right. Well, that's all I got, man. Anything else you want to drop in there?
No, that was it. Hopefully, hopefully it was able to encourage someone that the growth is not in the argument, it's in the solution space. That's all I'm saying. It's in the debrief. That's where you really grow as a couple.